They sent the deaf-mute girl to the roughest cowboy in the territory as a cruel joke. He never laughed. The buckboard came up the South Road on a Tuesday, which I remember because I'd just buried one of my dogs that morning, the old brindle hound that had slept at my feet for 11 years, and I was still feeling the rawness of that when I heard the wheels. I didn't go to the porch. I was patching a section of the south fence line, and I stayed where I was and watched it come. There were 2 men on the seat. Calhoun, who ran the general store in Delwood, and a younger man I didn't know, some cousin or hired hand. They pulled up short of the gate because men always did, always stopped a little ways back from my property like they expected the land itself to bite them. I set down the wire stretcher and walked over. Calhoun said my name. He was trying not to smile, but he wasn't quite succeeding. Said there was a girl, said it like it was the punchline to something, a girl who'd come in on the stage from Tucson, no papers, no money, and nobody in town wanted the trouble of her. And they'd taken up a collection to cover her keep for 1 month, and my place being the nearest spread with room to spare, and me being a man who worked alone. He let that hang in the air. The young man beside him made a sound in the back of his throat, not quite a laugh, and I looked at him until he stopped. I said, "What's wrong with her?" And Calhoun said, "She's a deaf-mute." He said it the way a man will sometimes say a thing he has been saving, enjoying it. He wanted to see what it did to my face. I kept my face how I keep it, the same in most weathers. I walked around to the back of the buckboard. She was sitting on a grain sack with her knees pulled up and her arms around them, and she was watching me with the stillness of somebody who has learned that stillness is the only tool they have. She was young, 20 maybe, 22. Dark hair tucked back under a gray hat that had been someone else's before it was hers. She had a bruise going yellow on her jaw that no one had said anything about. I put out my hand, not to help her down, just set it out there flat, palm up, and waited. She looked at the hand for a moment, and then she looked at my face, and then she reached out and put her fingers in mine and stood and climbed down off the wagon. I told Calhoun to keep his money. He started to say something, and I said it again, plainer, and he shut up, and then the buckboard turned around and went back down the South Road, and I could see him and the younger man talking and laughing between themselves, and I did not think about it. The girl stood beside me watching them go. The wind was carrying dust off the flats, and she reached up and held her hat brim and squinted into it. After a while, she turned and looked at the house. I showed her around by pointing. The well, the outhouse, the shed with the tools, the kitchen garden that had got overgrown on the east side. I pointed to the spare room off the back hall. I had built this place big, bigger than I needed, on account of a different life I had once imagined I'd be living, and I showed her the bed and the chest of drawers and the hook on the wall for her coat. She stood in the middle of that room looking at it, and I saw her swallow once. I went out and left her to it. That first week I mostly watched her out of the corner of my eye, the way you watch a horse you're not sure about yet, not staring, just aware. She was careful. That was the first thing. She moved through the house with this carefulness, like she was making herself small so as not to cost anything. She ate what I put on the table. She folded her napkin after each meal. She found the broom her 3rd morning and swept the whole house without being asked, every room, including mine. The second thing I noticed was that she was not helpless. She'd come out into the kitchen that first morning and watched me make coffee, and the next day she made it herself, and it was better than mine, which I did not mention. I had a book, a journal I'd kept, years of it, but I'd quit writing anything personal in it, and it mostly had supply records and weather notes and which pastures I'd rotated. I tore out a few blank pages and left them on the kitchen table with a pencil. That was all. I didn't make a thing of it. The next morning the pages were still on the table, and under them was a note in handwriting that slanted sharply to the right, clear and deliberate. "My name is Clara. Thank you for the room." Under that, after a pause you could see in the different angle of the pencil, "I can work." I picked up the pencil and wrote, "I know." And that was how we talked. It was slow. It was nothing like talking, more like passing something back and forth, like handing over a tool. But there was no performance in it. No filling up the silence with sounds that didn't mean anything. I had spent most of my adult life in a quiet that other people seemed to find threatening. And here was a woman who lived in a quiet that was simply the shape of her world. And the two of us did not need to make noise at each other to get through a day. I should tell you about my reputation, because it matters to this story. and I should probably tell it the way it actually was rather than the way I used to pretend it wasn't. I had come to this valley 15 years before with nothing but a horse, a rifle, and a name that had a bad smell on it from something that had happened in New Mexico. The something was not entirely my fault, but I was the only one left standing at the end of it, and the dead men had families, and I had decided that the better part of wisdom was distance. I rode until I liked the country, and then I stopped and I built something. I built it alone. I ran my cattle alone, and I hired no hands, and I did not go into Delwood more than I had to. And when I did, I made it clear by the way I stood, and the way I looked at people, that I was not interested in their opinions of me. Over years, this had become a kind of legend that I had not exactly discouraged, because a man with a dangerous reputation had fewer problems on his property than a man who was thought to be soft. What it meant in practice was that I had not had a genuine conversation with another person in some years, and I had stopped thinking about that as a loss, the way you stop thinking about a missing finger. You adjust. You do not miss it every minute of every day. You miss it at odd times, usually late at night, and then morning comes and there is work and the missing goes back to wherever it lives. So that was what I was the year Clara arrived. A man who had simplified himself down to what was useful and set aside what wasn't. She came out to the south pasture on her 5th day. I was working the young gray gelding I'd been trying to gentle down for 3 months, a horse with good bone but a bad memory, spooked by something in his past that I could not identify, and I'd been working him in the round pen most mornings with limited success. I heard the gate of the pen open, and I turned, and she was there. I gave her a look that meant, careful. She gave me a look back that I couldn't quite read, and came inside the pen. The horse went sideways immediately, got up on his back feet a little, and she stopped where she was and did not move. She didn't go stiff, that was the thing, she just stopped, and her face went quiet and she waited. And the horse came back down and looked at her. Then she held out her hand, same as I had done with her first day, palm up. The horse stretched his neck out toward her hand for a long time. She didn't push it, didn't move any closer, just let him decide. He sniffed her fingers, blew out a breath. She let him smell her wrist and her forearm, and then very slowly she brought her other hand up and put it flat on the side of his nose. He stood still. I had been working this horse for 3 months, and this woman stood in a pen with him for 2 minutes, and he stood still for her. She looked over at me. There was something in her face, not pride exactly, more like a shared recognition of something that didn't need words, which for her nothing did, and which for me was just a different kind of old habit. I walked over and stood beside her, and the 3 of us stayed there for a while, her hand on the horse's nose, the morning coming up over the ridge to the east and the light going gold on the dry grass, and it was one of those moments I have not found words for and probably never will. The trouble in Delwood came 6 weeks after Clara arrived. His name was Prewitt. He ran a spread north of town, ran it badly, owed money to half the county, and had the kind of manner that some men get when they're trying to cover the fact that they're afraid, loud, sharp-edged, always just this side of starting something. He had a younger brother named Dell who followed him around and laughed at the right times. I had been in town for supplies. Clara had come with me, she had started coming to town on those runs, and I had found that I did not object to it, which surprised me a little. She sat on the wagon seat beside me and watched the country go by, and sometimes she would tap my arm and point at something, a hawk, or a dust devil spinning off in the flats, not needing me to say anything about it, just sharing the noticing. We were loading the wagon in front of Calhoun's store when Prewitt and Dell came out of the saloon across the street. Prewitt had been drinking, not drinking stupid, but drinking mean, which was its own kind of worse. He came across the street deliberately, which meant he'd thought about it, or the beginning of thinking about it. He said something to me that I won't repeat, something about why a man of my type would need company of her type, and he gave Clara a look that I won't describe either. Dell laughed. A couple of men on the boardwalk went quiet. I set down the sack I was lifting into the wagon. I want to be clear about what happened next, because the version that went around Delwood was somewhat different from the actual events. Nobody threw a punch, nothing dramatic. What I did was look at Prewitt for a long enough time that most men would have backed up, and Prewitt did not quite back up, but he stopped being loud about it. And then I said 4 words very quietly, and he took stock of them, and he and Dell left. I don't remember the 4 words exactly, something that made the situation plain. When I turned around, Clara was watching me. She had her arms crossed, and she was looking at me with an expression I recognized as the way you look at something you've been trying to figure out for a while and just now have enough of the pieces. She held my gaze. I picked up the sack and put it in the wagon. That night at the table, she wrote me a note. She pushed it across between the bread and the lamp. Have men talked to you that way before? I wrote no. Not twice. She looked at that for a moment, and then she wrote, good. There was something in that word, the way she'd written it, the pressure of the pencil. I folded the note and put it in my shirt pocket. I don't know why I did that. I was not in the habit of keeping things. The fire started in the barn on a Thursday in late October. I smelled it before I saw it, woke out of a dead sleep at, I don't know the time, 1 in the morning, too. The smell was the first thing, that dry, hot smell that is different from a wood stove smell. There's a wildness to it, and I was already across the room before I was fully awake. I went out the back door, and the barn end was lit up orange, and the sky above it was black and full of sparks. My horses. I had 3 in the barn that night, including the gray gelding. I went for the barn. I don't remember Clara coming out of the house, but she was beside me at the barn door, both of us pulling it open, the heat pushing back at us like a wall. She had wrapped something, a wet cloth. She'd had the presence of mind to wet a cloth around her lower face, and she went in without stopping, and I went in behind her. We got the horses out. It took, I don't know, time works differently in a fire. You are not inside regular time when you are in a burning building. You are inside something else, something that is all sound and orange, and the need to move faster than you're able to move. We got all 3 out. The gray gelding was the last and the hardest, and Clara had a lead rope on him, and she was talking to him. That was the thing. In the noise and the heat and the horses screaming, she was talking to him. No sound coming out, just her mouth moving, just the shape of words, and he came. We stood in the field 50 yards away and watched the barn burn. One of the horses had cut himself on something coming out, not bad, a leg cut. And I was holding him, and Clara had her hand on the gray gelding's neck, and we stood there and watched it go. After a while, she reached over and put her hand on my forearm, just rested it there. I was dirty with smoke, and my forearms were burned some, nothing serious, and her hand was cool and steady on top of the smoke grime. We did not look at each other. We watched the fire. When it got lower, she wrote in the dirt with her boot heel, all 3 out. I looked at that, and then I wrote underneath it with my own boot, because of you. She rubbed it out with her foot. I thought about that for a long time afterward. The rubbing out. I thought maybe it was humility. Later, I came to think it was something else, that she was erasing the line between her doing and my doing, the way you don't divide up credit with somebody you're trying to hold a life with. The barn burned, and the horses were safe, and it had taken both of us, and it was not a ledger. I didn't know exactly what to do with that thought. I was not a man who had any practice with the idea that someone was trying to hold a life with him. I had been operating on the assumption, for a long time, that I was the only one who would be doing whatever holding was going to get done. I rebuilt the barn myself, same as I'd built everything here. Clara helped. Not in the way of being told to help, she just showed up the first morning I started clearing the burned wood, and she worked. She was strong, was the thing I kept finding out. She didn't have a man's strength, but she had endurance and judgment, and the judgment was the harder thing to come by. We worked most of October in this way. I would be doing something and look up, and she'd be there, doing the next necessary thing without being told what the next necessary thing was. I had worked alone for so long that this was strange. Like finding a rhythm with someone else in a dance you'd only ever danced alone, bumping against each other a little at first, and then not even noticing you weren't bumping anymore. The new barn took 3 weeks. We raised the main beams on a Saturday, both of us on the ladder with ropes, and when the first beam seated in its notch, we stopped and looked at each other across the gap of it, both of us breathing hard, and she smiled. I will describe that smile because it is important, and because I had been looking at her face for 6 weeks by then and thought I knew most of what her face could do, and I did not know about that smile. It was not polite. It was not the careful kind. It was sudden and crooked, and it involved her whole face, and it lasted about 2 seconds, and then it was gone, and she went back down the ladder. I sat on the beam for a moment after she went down. Something had occurred to me that had not occurred before, at least not in a way I'd allowed to stay in the front of my mind. It occurred to me that I did not want her to go. that the month that Calhoun's collection was supposed to cover had been up for weeks, that I had not said anything about it, and she had not said anything about it, and we had simply both kept doing what we were doing, and that this now seemed like the most important fact in my life that I had been pretending was not a fact. I climbed down the ladder. She was at the workbench sorting hardware. I stood there for a while, not knowing exactly how to do this, which was nothing new. I had never in my life known how to do this. I picked up a bolt and put it down. She looked up at me. I wrote on the back of a piece of board with a pencil stub, "Stay on." She looked at it. I wrote under it, "As long as you want." She took the pencil from my fingers. She turned the board over, and on the clean side she wrote 3 words and then looked at me until I read them. "I already am." I have thought since about the word joke. Calhoun and his friend and the rest of them who were in on it, what they thought they were doing. A dangerous man and a woman who cannot speak, that was the comedy of it in their minds. He won't know what to do with her. She won't be able to tell him anything. They will be 2 mutes rattling around in that big house. What they did not understand, and what I think most people who talk a great deal do not understand, is that silence is not the absence of something. It is a medium. It has texture and weight and meaning. What Clara and I built in that house was not a lesser version of communication with the words taken out. It was its own thing with its own grammar, and I was better at it than I had known. All those years of keeping my own counsel, of letting men's opinions wash off, of finding what I needed to know by watching rather than asking. Turns out I had been learning a language I didn't have a name for, and she was fluent in it. The joke was on them. We married in the spring. There was no ceremony to speak of. The judge in Delwood who handled such paperwork was a man named Osterhaus, who had the advantage of being indifferent to gossip and not particularly interested in anyone's business but his own. We rode to town on a Wednesday morning, Clara in the blue dress she'd bought with her own money over the winter from the wages I paid her, and we signed the papers and Osterhaus shook both our hands, and that was that. Clara had been raised Quaker somewhere back east, before whatever had brought her west, and the Friends had a saying she wrote for me once on a full page of paper, larger than her usual notes, and pinned it to the wall in the kitchen where I could see it. There is a spirit that delights to do no evil. I thought about that saying a lot over the following years. I was not a religious man, not in any organized way, but that sentence sat right with me. A spirit that delights to do no evil. Just a simple preference for right conduct, which is, if you strip everything else away, most of what I had ever been trying for. On the ride home that afternoon, the light was coming down at a low angle off the hills, and the road was good, not too dusty, the horses moving steady. Clara sat close beside me on the wagon seat. We had been riding like that for months, the cold having provided a reason and the warm weather not having changed the habit, and she had her hand through my arm, and she was looking at the country the way she did, that clear, attentive watching. About 2 miles from the ranch, she tapped my arm and pointed east, toward the ridge. There was a hawk up there hunting, just riding the thermals, tipping and tilting against the blue. We watched it for a while, the wagon still rolling, the hawk banking and turning. I had spent the better part of my adult life convinced that what I had made of myself, the solitude, the silence, the bad reputation that kept the world at a distance, was the best arrangement I was capable of. A fixed thing. A man reduced to what was durable. That hawk banked once more and dropped, and Clara leaned in against my shoulder, watching it go, and I put my arm around her and we rode the last 2 miles home like that, in the good quiet, under an October sky going orange at the edges, and it turned out I had been wrong about what I was capable of. It turned out I had not known the half of it,